I think you already copied today's material. We're going to move on lab exercise. Before doing some lab exercises, we need to take a look at kind of review 3D geometric modeling, especially using 3D Studio Max. Some fundamental theoretical background, very fundamental things about 3D geometric modeling, okay? So as syllabus shows you, our scheduled material for today is the first stage of 3D geometric modeling. In the series of lectures from this week, we will handle some geometric modeling issues. But actually, we already tackled some geometric modeling issues. And we're going to move on. Some complicated, some sophisticated geometric modeling issues, especially for architectural building modeling. We need to use some kind of orthogonal buildings, walls, and building elements modeling using 3D Studio Max. But actually, 3D Max or some fundamental 3D graphics doesn't aim to only design or model buildings. There are so many general types of geometry. So today we're going to deal with some fundamental geometry, fundamental geometric modeling issues, not just for buildings. But anyway, we're going to move on. But let's review and let's take a look at what to do today. We have some series of lab exercises. You don't need to take care of rendering or visualization issues. Last week, we created some environment files. For example, environment mental array max file is given. So you can use that file. Simply import what you create, the geometry, and render it. And then you can get easily visualize your geometric model thanks to that environment mental array.max file. You don't need to take time for rendering or some lighting, shading, some detailed and technical issues in visualization. You can keep focusing on geometric modeling from now on. But one rendering related lab exercise also prepared. Okay, let's review 3D geometric modeling. I introduce you this kind of subcomponent of your geometry. Simply think about this box shape, 3D box object. You know there is a box object. You can easily create that kind of box using 3D Max, Rhino, SketchUp. But there are several types of subcomponents, subgeometry. Vertices, edges, faces, polygons, surfaces. They are all some geometry or actually topology terms. But in geometry, there are some similar terms. Vertex, vertices, vertex for points, edges for lines, something like that. Later on, we're going to review that kind of some geometry and topology issues, but right now, you can simply take a look at even one single box has its subcomponents like this sequence of subcomponents, subgeometry. So I already told you there are very simple way to create 3D object. Just creating an object predefined in computer software, this kind of box. You can easily create box when you're clicking box icon and drag it, make a height. Or even teapot, torus knot, cone, cube, whatever. But any kind of software provided geometry, you can create easily. That they are so-called primitives. And you can modify this. Simply delete one face, one polygon, and you can rotate it flip the face, add some inset polygons, subdivided, tessellated lines, edges, and extrude them, and so on. And then you can realize that that is totally different thing from this box, even if you get started with a simple primitive. So the first way, actually not first, some fundamental way of creating 3D objects is simply take advantages of predefined primitives in 3D Max or some similar 3D software. Even teapot, legendary Utah teapot is one type of primitive in 3D Max. Martin Newell, who's kind of early developer in 3D software, when he was in Utah, he found near his desk, probably, he found this famous and legendary Utah teapot was there, and he tried to model this one in computational manner. So that's kind of legendary and some kind of historic object. That is why 3D Max use this one as a render icon, and there is a primitive teapot. Okay, the first way, we actually reviewed this one, but let's take a look at again. Because we will do some series of lab exercises for creating 3D objects using this kind of sequence. First one is extrusion. You are familiar with making some 3D objects in SketchUp. Draw something and push-pull. That is extrusion, extrude something. When you create an AutoCAD box, AutoCAD lines, you can simply type extrude command so that you can extrude, as it literally means, make your 2D elements in 3D object using another axis. In this case, Z axis. This is 3D Max interface. Firstly, you need to define this kind of 2D, so-called section profile. Any freely drawn lines or rectangle shape, circle, you can simply extrude them using specific depth, specific height to Z direction so that you can create this kind of 3D object. That is very fundamental and kind of basic way of creating 3D object, extrusion. Next one, a little bit different from, actually not that close, very different from extrusion, lathing. In general term, that is revolving a surface. You can define this kind of shape as a section and revolve using one single axis. When you create your own customized post column as an interior design element, probably this is the easiest way to create that kind of object, okay? Lathing. Or some cup base, small stuffs in our daily life, you can create that kind of object using this kind of geometry. We're gonna do some lab exercise today. In 3D Max, define one single section profile, rotate it, revolve it. In Max, the modifier name is lathe. That is why I put the term lathing here. So lathe modifier will create this kind of 3D object. You can control this axis point. When you move this axis or rotate, change the axis, the final outcome shape going to be totally changed. We will see that. We're going to review that. The third one, actually this is very important and kind of frequently used method to create 3D object. First element, section profile. Second one, path. Section profile along this path so that we can see computer can generate this kind of 3D objects. Using Max interface, those two screens show you this one is section profile and the path. Section along a path so that we can create that kind of object. When we change the shape along a path, there is kind of skinning. The term skinning is 3D Max term. In general term, there is kind of morphing. This is another way of creating 3D objects. And another one is Boolean operation. Kind of arithmetic equation. Let's take a look at this one. This one plus this one makes this kind of plus looking shape. Plus another one, gonna make this and box and a sphere. Their intersection gonna create this one. Minus this one. So outcome file gonna be totally different from your imagination when you get started from this kind of primitive objects. All these are primitive, right? But outcome file gonna be totally different, another type of geometry, even if they are basically some primitives such as box, sphere, and cylinder, 3 cylinders. So creating geometry in 3D Max simply says kind of iterative, sometimes never-ending process of modification. Create your own simple geometry and try to edit, try to modify it until the geometry you want. So this is very time-consuming, tedious. And anyway, you have to spend a lot of time. But there are several different types of utilities and some powerful tools in 3D software. Especially in 3D Max, there are more than 100 modifiers to modify your geometry. Actually, you don't need to know everything. Let me tell you very frequently used one and very useful, powerful modifiers, especially for interior architecture design. And then you can take advantages of such modifiers and some powerful tools when you create your geometry. Another thing you should know that is simply think about making this object. I show you this very well-known example of Boolean operation, but actually you can create this one from nothing. You can draw one by one, face by face. Even some more methods, some more tools, or some other ways you can find out. You don't need to use this Boolean operation always. There are several more ways. So for a specific geometric shape, there are various, sometimes millions of different ways. But anyway, there is kind of efficient way. So we need to see, and you need to know what it is. That is why we should take a look at some modifiers, utilities, some powerful tools in this kind of 3D software. But actually, these are kind of modifier-based modification, some utility-based. But actually, there is a specific reason that I show you these subcomponents. Vertex, edge, face, polygon, surface. You can control all of these. What if you drag and drop those 2 points to Z direction, to the top? And then this shape gonna be changed like this, kind of wedge shape box. What if you move or rotate the line here, the edge here? What if you rotate the line or scale the line? You can easily control the box shape. That is so-called editable poly. You can control polygons and their subgeometry. So in general, converting into editable poly is kind of frequently used method for creating 3D geometry. You can edit subgeometric components such as vertex, edge, polygon, and some more, even more things, as well as some modifiers. We will see what are they today actually as a kind of first review. And actually there are very famous and several ways to create your objects from primitives. For example, if you want to create some kind of interior environment, the first thing you can do is drawing a box and install a camera inside of that box. That's it. That's fundamental environment for interior room, something like this. And you can create some vertices, edges for creating windows, ceiling, or bottom objects, doors, and so on. So from a box to a specific interior room, when you create a kind of big scale building, even high-rise buildings, you can get started from a box object. And iterative, I told you, sometimes never-ending process of modification from that primitive. There are several tools and tips in geometric editing. We're going to take a look at some tips and some fundamental and kind of mandatory options you have to look at in our lab exercise today. Another thing you need to know is 2D drawing. You know AutoCAD for drawing floor plans, elevation, sections, whatever. In 2D, such kind of 2D drawing is also very important because anyway, we use 2D elements for creating 3D objects. For example, drawing a section profile for extrusion, for revolving, for sweeping. Anyway, you have to know how to draw 2D elements in 3D Max. Okay? Another way is simply import your CAD files. If you have your floor plan file, you can easily import to 3D Max and extrude it so that you can easily create your walls, your physical environment in 3D environment using Max. Of course, there are amount of modification, iterative work for creating and editing, deleting some geometric shapes. All these process, the methods are kind of in between and some mixed use. The last thing you have to know is, thankfully, there are amount of predefined geometry, such as 3D warehouse, or some blog, or someone who's freely distribute some geometry files for students, someone like you. So you can take advantages of such predefined objects. So you have to know how to use that kind of some free geometry library from internet. And of course, you can modify them if there is no some license issues to create your own things from some others predefined geometry object. Let's take a look at some 3D Max interface again, one by one. 2D text is kind of very easily you can make using 3D Max or even SketchUp, and simply extrude it so that you can create 3D text like this. 2D drawing, we're going to draw some 2D objects today for making extrude. Whenever you can get 2D geometry, it's kind of subject to be extruded. You can extrude that from some auto-generated 2D section or imported 2D section, whatever. We're going to review that part too. Sweeping is general term, but in 3D Max, there is a modifier named loft. Using loft modifier, you can draw 2D section profile and the path, and eventually you can get this kind of 3D object. I told you revolving is general term and the lathe is the term in 3D Max. There is a modifier named lathe. Simple 2D drawing and some modification for detailed 2D edit and revolve it using lathe modifier in 3D Max so that you can create this kind of vase, cup, like shape, geometry. For the Boolean operation, there is operator named compound object in 3D Max. Using compound object, there is Boolean or pro-Boolean. There is one type of modifier defined in 3D Max. Simply draw a bigger box and smaller box overlapped, and bigger box minus smaller box. That is output file. You don't need to take care of the bottom because you can control move and you can anticipate the final outcome when you create simple 2-box shape using primitive. Of course, there are some more options. A minus B, B minus A, or union, so that you can merge them together as a single object, or intersection. Even cut you can create. And of course, there are some more options. We're going to review such part today. In a summary, I would like to put an emphasis on you have free control to sub-geometry, sub-geometry components, especially to vertex, edge, and polygon, so-called editable poly. So in editing vertex mode, you can control some corner, smooth, bezier, weld, fillet. They are some kind of new terms to you, but actually you may find out those terms in edit poly mode today and probably in the future. In edge editing mode, there are some different terms: chamfer, bridge, connect, mirror, boolean, but you should know what are they. In polygon mode, there is extrude, bevel, inset, flip, hinge from edge, and extrude along spline, and so on. Simply think about that. You know what is extrusion. Vertex cannot be extruded because there is a vertex. Even if you can extrude it, there is a line. It's not visible. It's not 3D, okay? It could be extruded when it is a polygon. Even a line, even an edge couldn't be extruded, actually. So anyway, we're going to review those parts in editable poly mode. And of course, there are so many modifiers, I told you, more than 100 modifiers. Edit poly, a little bit different from converting to editable poly. We're going to take a look at what are different. And NUMS subdivision to create some smooth edge objects in auto-generated algorithm, and some freeform related modifiers, famous FFD, and mesh smooth, turbo smooth, and so on. These are kind of preview and overview for 3D Max geometric editing.